Hey sightseers, if you've been following along on the channel, you know that this will be our third stop along our months-long cross-country road trip. And as you can see, we've landed up in New Mexico, where we'll be spending the next several weeks checking out small towns, ghost towns, historic places, basically whatever we end up discovering while we're here. If you're new to the channel, I'm Sightseeing Sally. This is Meandering Marty. He's got his own channel, by the way. And then, of course, our lovable pups, Mocha and Little Leo there, who are accompanying us on this epic months-long road trip. Today, we're going to be checking out San Antonio, New Mexico, a small, barely blip of a town just south of Socorro, right off Interstate 25. And the reason why I dragged you out to this bedroom community of Socorro is because there's a lot of history here. History that dates back even before the mid-19th century, when San Antonio was the last outpost on the Camino Real. To start things off, I thought I'd show you the old mission church that still stands. Believed to have been built in 1929, 1930. This old church is a reminder of San Antonio's past. You see, back in the day before San Antonio was even San Antonio, this region was settled by an indigenous people known as the Puro Indians. Later, roughly sometime in the 1600s, a mission was established here by Franciscan priests. I imagine a lot of the buildings that were built during that time looked an awful lot like this old mission church. For about 50 years, the Franciscan priests were here making converts of the locals, of the indigenous peoples. Then in 1675, that whole mission burned to the ground, literally by an Apache raid. For the next 150 years or so, this area remained largely uninhabited. Then, roughly, I want to say 1820 or so, farmers from northern New Mexico moved down, resettled, and began farming in this area. That, along with the establishment of the railroad, essentially brought life back to San Antonio. Here you can see the old train depot that was established here by the Santa Fe Railroad. From what I understand, when the Santa Fe Railroad came to this area, one of the things they did was connect a line between San Antonio and nearby Carthage, where they were mining for coal. The line between the two brought money to town, and soon there was a thriving community of about 1,250 people. Today, there sits roughly about 100 people that live in San Antonio. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is considered a bedroom community of the larger town or larger city of Socorro. If you're interested in seeing Socorro, stay tuned. It's very likely we'll be visiting that in the near future. Just to give you all who like to follow along on Google Maps or Google Earth where we're at, this is the southern end of San Antonio. It's the older section of town where you're more likely to find remnants of the original town. Remnants like the old former Crystal Palace, which, according to my research, was reportedly once a dance hall. Now I believe it's been converted into someone's living quarters, as evidenced by the vehicles sitting outside. Whoa, check this out. Have you ever seen such a creepy looking scarecrow before in your life? I don't know, if I was some hungry little bird or rabbit looking to score some dinner off this garden, I dare say I probably wouldn't. Not with that scarecrow overseeing the yard. Off in the distance there is where you'll find San Antonio. But if we turn and look off to the southeast, somewhere out there, about 28 miles as the crow flies, is the Trinity test site. The Trinity's test site being where scientists detonated the first nuclear bomb on July 16th, 1945. Given that the Trinity test site is part of White Sands missile range and visitors aren't allowed other than maybe one day a year when they open it up, this will probably be the closest that I'll get ever to seeing the Trinity test site, unless by some chance or good fortune I'm invited there. And what does that all have to do with San Antonio? Well, follow along with me. We're gonna head back into town and I'm gonna share the reason as to how those two are connected. You can see we're now over at the Old Bar and Cafe. Besides being home to New Mexico's first green chili burger ever, this establishment is where many of the scientists working on the Manhattan Project hung out before the detonation of the Trinity bomb. Opened by Frank Chavez and his wife Dee in 1945, it didn't take long before a group of prospectors made this their local hangout. Of course, they would soon find out that those prospectors were really scientists, nuclear scientists, working on the Manhattan Project over at the Trinity test site. But that's not the only interesting historical information about this place that we can find here. If we go on inside, we'll discover the old bar top that was used in Gus Hilton's mercantile store, which burned down in the 1940s. If the name Hilton sounds familiar, it should. Gus Hilton was the father of Conrad Hilton, the hotel magnate and great-grandfather of Paris Hilton. Conrad Hilton grew up here in San Antonio, and it is said that as a child, he would meet visitors on the train and bring their luggage right up to the hotel of his father's so that the visitors coming in would all stay at his father's hotel. Much like the old mercantile general store that you see in front of me here, Gus Hilton had his own mercantile along with interests in Carthage mining, the hotel he ran, among other things. He was a very influential and prominent man here in San Antonio back in the day. As stated, the building that housed his mercantile burned down in the 1940s. However, the bar from inside the mercantile was salvaged and it now resides here at the Owl Bar and Cafe. Since we're here, we decided we would grab some lunch. Currently, they've got some of the best green chili burgers in the state. I decided to try out the chili cheeseburger. Marty, on the other hand, I believe got a plain old hamburger. So I think this is it. Yep, there's yours. Because we got the pups with us, we couldn't eat inside. But that's okay. We make do with what we've got. Right, Marty?
Nope.
I think he just opened up my beans and was probably expecting something more like a chocolate shake.
That's what I thought.
No, just beans. Whoever dubbed their burgers being the best chili burgers in New Mexico, I'm gonna have to agree. I've had several different chili burgers or versions of New Mexico's green chili burger, and by far, this one tastes the best. One of the things that I had read online was that you could come to the San Antonio General Store and get yourself some hand-scooped ice cream, among other things. Unfortunately, it is now closed. I don't know if that's recent or not, but never fear, sightseers, if you're looking for something icy cold, you can always head over to the Buckhorn and grab yourself a cold one, an adult beverage kind of cold one, if you know what I mean. Lest I get sidetracked by the thought of icy cold adult beverages, I just want to mention that at the time when the Trinity bomb was detonated, it was said that the effects could be felt over 100 miles away. Can you imagine then being only 28 miles from that site, what the effects must have been like for the people who lived here? It is said that windows blew out and the residents could see the mushroom cloud up in the sky, and it literally felt like the end of the world was upon them. Can you imagine that? especially if you were young and didn't understand what was going on, or if the scientists, those prospectors, weren't exactly forthright, which I don't know if they were or not, but if they weren't, and the residents here had no idea that that was going to happen, how scary that must have been for them. You know that Meandering Marty likes to play with things that go boom. Well, I've been around him a few times or two when he's set off things like that. And I know what it felt like to experience that. But to feel the effects of the Trinity bomb detonating, all that comes to mind is, wow. Anyways, I don't want to beat that story to death. I just wanted to get you to picture it in your mind's eye and maybe just put yourself in their shoes. Moving on, if we take a little walk down Miera Street north, you'll notice that there's this empty building here. Doesn't appear to be anything going on in there. And then if we look up over there, you can see a windmill. The paint is so faded and weather beaten from the sun, I can't read what it says. Here we are, the neighborhood welcoming committee. For a second, I thought it was going to be a replay of Coffeeville. If you don't know what I mean, well, you'd have to become a Sightseeing Sidekick or a patron to get the story on that. Speaking of which, I've got several shout outs to give. First, I'd like to give a shout out to Mark G from Illinois for tipping our trip jar. Next, I'd like to give a shout out to Joseph and Timothy for becoming our latest patrons on Patreon. Last but not least, I want to give a shout out to all you Sightseeing Sidekicks for being members of our YouTube channel. If I'm not mistaken, there are 47 of you. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your support in tipping the trip jar, becoming patrons, sidekicks, whatever. It's just really great because it helps us get out to these wonderful places across America. Moving on, some of you by now might be wondering about all the different abandoned structures here in San Antonio. As I've shared with you the history over the past, I haven't mentioned yet the fact that in 2018, this little bedroom community was severely impacted by a major flood. From what I understand, the flooding was so bad that there was like 2 feet of mud and rainwater that basically swept through the town. Now, whether or not that flood is the cause of all the abandoned buildings here is a question that I don't personally have the answer to. However, if I were to wager a guess, some of it was caused by the flood, some of it's been caused by economic factors, and maybe the rest of it is just a lack of progress. In its heyday, San Antonio, as I had mentioned early on in the video, it had 1,250 residents. And, you know, there's the agricultural aspects of this area, and then also coal mining that really are the 2 main drivers back then that brought money to the community. When the profits from the coal mining dried up because they mined all the coal, or the coal that they were mining was no longer used, that would have caused a major downturn in the town's economy. Along with that, I thought I had read that agriculturally they had suffered some losses over the years, and that may too have been an impact as to why San Antonio never was able to grow beyond the 1,250 people. Then when you add in things that have happened in more recent times, including the 2018 flood, well, I guess you could say this is just one of those towns that hasn't ever been able to overcome fully its losses. Then again, you could say that this town is also one of those towns that still has the possibility of future growth. With the town becoming more of like a bedroom community for those working in the larger cities around, there's still potential here. There's still potential for growth. And that's something to keep in mind. We're gonna move on. There's another spot I wanna show you before leaving the limits of San Antonio. And that would be the San Antonio Catholic Cemetery. I was curious to see if any of the Hiltons were buried here. This grave over here has been busted open. Probably from the elements, I'm thinking. That one's cracking too.
1902 to 1989.
Well, it doesn't look like there are any Hiltons buried here. Not that I was expecting it, but you never know. There could have been. Something else that you may not know about San Antonio, New Mexico is that just down the road from it to the south, you'll find the Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge. If you know anything about birds, you may know that in the winter, sandhill cranes fly down and spend time in this area. And we're not talking about just a few sandhill cranes, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of sandhill cranes. And if you've ever heard a sandhill crane honking as it does flying overhead, you'll know that when you get that many sandhill cranes down here, the noise can be deafening. Of course, sandhill cranes aren't the only animal species that make their home here. You'll find roadrunners, coyotes, mule deer, and of course, other waterfowl, like the ducks and geese you see floating out on the water, enjoying this beautiful evening out in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. Hopefully you enjoyed learning about the history of San Antonio. Again, I think the three things that make San Antonio a stop, a must stop, are the Bosque del Apache Wildlife Refuge, the Owl Bar and Cafe, where you can find the bar top from Gus Hilton's Mercantile, along with New Mexico's first ever green chili cheeseburger, and the Buckhorn, where Bobby Flay got his meat beat by the owner. And I don't mean that literally. There was a cook-off, and I guess the owner showed him how to make a real green chili cheeseburger. Until next time.